Welcome back to the School of Resistance at the Akademie der Künste in Berlin. We meet now for a talk after the film The Moscow Trials, to talk about the film, but I guess also about the situation in Russia, of course, but also about the possibilities of political art. And my name is Florian Malzacher. I'm a writer and curator, and I will first introduce the guests tonight. Online in Moscow at the moment, I think in Moscow, is Victoria Lomasko, who joins from Moscow. And now there's a, sorry, I was irritated by the sound. Victoria's work is mainly not only to do graphic reportages. So she in her work, in her artistic work, draws, for example, trials, political trials, but also other things. Does reportage in the, let's say, far lands of Russia, but also in the former Soviet Union. And she was part in several of these trials, and two of the trials that were a topic in the film just now, where she made drawings as an activist and a chronologist in a way. And she was also, Victoria, you were also at the Moscow trial at the project that we just saw, and you maybe saw her in the audience sitting there and drawing. And the second guest is Sandra Frimmel, joining from Zurich. And Sandra was is an art historian at the University of Zurich and has written much about trials against art, much also about art in Russia. And she's also a project leader of Astra's foundation, a foundation for art projects to support peace with the main focus on the South Caucasus. And how fitting, she is the translator of two books of Victoria into German, and also was an advisor, a dramaturgical advisor, and I guess political advisor, art historic advisor to the Moscow trials. And you maybe have also seen her in the film sitting in the audience. And last but not least, Thomas Ostermeier, who is actually here with me in the building, and is, I guess, as you know, one of the internationally best-known German theater directors, and since 1999, artistic director of Schaubühne in Berlin. And not only Schaubühne is one of the main producers of many of Milo's work, but Thomas Ostermeier also in his work has very often a very clear political focus. And another thing, and we will talk, I guess, about the possibilities of theater to be political, to maybe to intervene into political situation, but also you have close relations, we just talked about it, with the artistic community in Moscow, and especially with Kirill Sebrennikov, and so you also, maybe in a way, also a little bit represent him in this conversation.
Quite an honor.
Not to put any pressure on you. So maybe to start, I would say a few things about the film, because I guess the reason why I was invited is also, or one of the reasons is also because I at the moment create a series of lectures and talks on the topic of art as assembly, on assemblies in the last decade, which became quite almost iconic topos, but also a tool in politics and activism, but also in many artistic projects, maybe especially also in theater, where we have seen a lot of works, theater works which took the form of assemblies, of parliaments, and of trials. And Milo's The Moscow Trials is, of course, a prime example for this. And what interests me in this context is also that theater, especially, I think, is a place where conflict can be acted out, or traditionally has this role also, where adversary positions can be present, expressed in the same space, and not only friendly, not only in an appeasing way, but with the aim to convince, with the aim to win over, or to use the Gramsci term, to kind of like defend or the hegemonic project. So this, of course, would be also a description of what democracy should be, a platform for these conflicts. But I guess theater has something else that it can offer to this as a medium. Because theater is kind of a paradoxical machine where everything that happens is real and fictitious in the same way. It's symbolic and actual and at the same time. So, and we are kind of like, are used to this double take, and I think it enables us to be part of a situation and at the same time watch ourselves from the outside to a degree, and to also analyze the situation while we are entangled in it. And I think this is also why I would actually kind of insist, even though we saw the film now, that the Moscow trials for me is less a film in its own right, which of course it's as well, but mainly really a documentation of a performance, of a theater work, which of course was very real in terms of its topics, for the participants, for the implications this situation had on their life. So there's no doubt about the realness and also the heavy realness of this. But at the same time, it is a fiction. It is a theater play. It offers the fiction of situation, well, of the possibility of a fair trial, for example, but maybe even from today's point of view, almost utopian fiction, that it would be possible that all these people are in the same space, that we are in the same space with very different opinions in our society. And I guess maybe also, almost 10 years later, we not only see it as a film about Russia, or at least I don't only see it as a film about Russia, but we think of the US, we think about many European countries, as situations have increasingly become, or the path for this kind of exchange has become increasingly smaller, and maybe also the question that goes with it, do we want to be with these people in one space? So we see it in the film, but also the question is, of course, is it the utopia that we would have these discussions or not? And maybe we can talk a little bit about this later. I would start, Victoria, with asking you that you have witnessed two of the 3 trials that were talked about, and the Moscow trials itself, and you were doing drawing in this, and maybe to start with the very general questions. What do you think when you see this film 8-9 years later, and what would a project like this look like today? Would it actually be still possible to do a project like this? Would it be possible to bring these people that we saw in one space today?
I felt a very strong feeling this moment, and I think that many things had changed during these years, and at the same time nothing had changed, because many concrete cases, political phases, agendas had changed. But in general, we continue to have internal President Putin, very strong censorship, repression. We don't have any perspective. And when I watched this moment, the film, I was thinking that very often I hear about Russia. It's this is terrible. This is dangerous country, but there is not boring. It's not boring, and it's good for an artist. It's very easy. Go to any trial, go on the street, go on the rally, and an artist will get very strong and interesting topics, or topics about strange situation, about crazy situation, about absurd. And at this moment I think it's boring. It's boring that nothing had changed. And I can a lot tell on this topic about religion, about heroes of this movie. Your question was about it's possible to together these people now. It's impossible. And I can share my screen and show the portraits. For example, Marat Gelman. I watched at this moment how he brave told about political provocation art. And what at this moment? Marat Gelman, a long time ago in immigration in Chernobyl, where he works as a director of a visual center. What with Ekaterina Dyogoy? Ekaterina Dyogoy lives in immigration many years in Austria, and she is as a director of a big art festival. What with activist people? What with Katya Samutsevich from the Pusher Right? I don't know. After this performance, after this film, I didn't have any news about Katya. What about Enter, one from the main Orthodox activists who was waiting for when the Pusher came out from prison. He fell in love with Maria Alyokhina from the Pusher, and I think this moment they continue their relationships. And I tried to check the news about the main Orthodox activist, Vladimir Sergeyev, and I can find only my pictures about this person. So it's their life had turned into a very different way, because these people were from different social groups, and only when it was political agenda from the government that yes, our Orthodox Church is so important, they can be in one hall. This moment, another political agenda, and these people absolutely impossible gather on one event.
Thank you. And how would you describe the change of the political situation? I mean, as far as I know, you for example, haven't exhibited in Russia for many years. So do you still see room for art to be part of resistance, of opposition, or is it working only in like subcultural context, or is there in the official realm any space for opposing views in art?
The question is about Russian art in general. What has happened with contemporary art at this moment? Yes?
Yeah, and also if there's opposition, is there still officially oppositional views in art possible anywhere in institutions or in newspapers, etc.?
It's absolutely impossible. And I think you even can imagine how it's impossible. Because it's not new laws regarding not only real media. It touched all social networks. And in our new laws, our social networks are the same like media. And there are enough people who are in prison because they did post, for example, on Facebook, on Contact, our Russian social networks. It's not one case, it's enough cases. So people here have a lot of censorship.
Maybe to bring you into the conversation, Sandra, and your view, because you have a close contact and and you're very informed also about the situation in Russia. So maybe could you add to this, or maybe I start with the same question: what do you feel when you look back at this film? Does it look like something very far away, or does it look like something still very close to you?
It's far away and very close to me at the same time, because I'm living with this topic and this theme and all the laws and censorship in art for a very long time. And you asked Vika if she thinks it would be possible to bring all these people together in one room at the moment. To be honest, I never understood how Milo made it possible for them to be all in one room at the same time. But I think the time for Orthodox believers and representatives of contemporary art to talk to each other has passed long ago, because, as Vika said, the agenda has changed. So the Orthodox believers have reached their goal. They have managed to introduce new laws or to strengthen existing laws or make changes in existing laws, to censor artistic production, to forbid to use religious symbols in artistic production, in exhibitions. They have managed to increase censorship, as Vika said, and every trial dealt with in the Moscow trials, and every trial after this has been used to introduce new laws and to introduce new possibilities of censorship, but not only from the side of Orthodox believers, but from the side of, let's call them maybe traditionalists, who believe in nation, religion, and the pureness of Russian identity. They have introduced laws to forbid the using of swear words in public for every private person, but also we know that in film, in theater. The so-called propaganda of homosexuality is a highly critical issue. And as Vika mentioned, the last, I would call it, coup maybe at the end of last year was to sharpen or change the law about foreign agents. So everybody who is so-called political active in the internet is now considered an enemy of the people, so a foreign agent, and you have to register in case you operate politically on the internet. And this directly concerns Vika, as she's sitting here, because her first book about the trial against the organizers of forbidden art was still published in Russia, in Russian. And the second book couldn't have been published in Russia because the publisher was too afraid, because she's working with highly delicate and political and other topics, critical topics. And she decided to publish all her works on the internet. And this is now considered political, critical action. And all those people have to register as foreign agents. So they have to, this is a very interesting process, because they have to uncover themselves and publicly declare themselves foreign agents, enemies of the people, and afterwards won't find work, won't have the possibility to exhibit anymore. And this is a kind of social suicide.
It's also interesting maybe that we talk about later that, of course, well, I remember that Dmitry Vlensky from Studielat once said, like, okay, we were always so ashamed of the situation, but actually now we feel less ashamed because so many other countries are in similar situation, and these laws about foreign agents and registering is something which became a tool in so many societies. So maybe later, which I meant before, like we look at Russia, of course, as a very specific case on one hand, and at the same time we see something that uncannily familiar, or that becomes uncannily familiar also from many other places. But before maybe going there, Thomas, to bring you into the conversation, you have worked in Russia a couple of times. You just told me that you don't go there since a couple of years now, but you have contact with many artists, and you are very close to Kirill Sebrennikov also. In exchange, maybe you could also add your view on the situation in or how you experience it, maybe also with a bit focus on theater, how the situation in the theaters in Russia at the moment is.
Well, we saw recently what happened to Kirill Serebrennikov in the summer. There was the trial against him. It had a very ambivalent ending, this trial, because he was called guilty, which is, of course, a scandal, because there's no real proof for him concerning the money and the budget and the criminal dealing with the budget of the Gogol Center. So one could read this trial as a clear sign: be aware if you have any engaged kind of theater making or art making, we will find another way of doing a trial against you and sentence you. I think in this special case with Kirill, maybe the people from Russia can tell us if I'm right or wrong. Maybe he's a bit too prominent in order to be persecuted in a much more violent way, like we see it with a lot of protesters at the moment who are sent to prisons outside of Moscow, immediately deported to the outskirts with no possibility to go onto the toilet, with no water, with no food supplied. So this is purely violent, totalitarian oppression. In the case of Kirill, I have the feeling that they were clever enough for the outside to say, okay, he's not sent into prison, or even worse, into a working camp. But we are sending a clear sign to the community of artists and to the community of opposition protesters that we will persecute these people. And now, a few days ago, or 10 days ago, he lost the artistic directorship of Gogol Center. So this is the second step, or the fifth step, of silencing Kirill Serebrennikov. He cannot leave the country. He doesn't have a passport. He needs to obey these 3 years of staying at home, or 3 years of not leaving the country. And this is a very special case which I can report. But I had the feeling, first was a trial in the summer, and now what's happening at the moment, that things are very much worsening and getting more serious and more serious, maybe because the political power feels threatened by what's happening with the demonstrations, by what's happening in a neighboring country, by an overall weakness of the system. So it can also be read as the last defense battles before a political power comes down. This can also be a reading of the situation.
Which I give as a question I would like to give back to you too, but maybe before, I find it interesting that you mentioned, of course, another strategy next to the official trials is campaigns of defamation, of smearing people, and there are many examples for this too, which has also, let's say, a long
history,
long communist history, unfortunately, of accusing artists of rape, of stealing money, of mismanagement, all kinds of ways of other ways of kind of discrediting people. But maybe to stay with what you said last, do you have, Victoria and Sandra, do you have hope that, as it is suggested sometimes in the media, in the Western media at the moment, that there is a weakness of the government at the moment, that there is a moment of change, or is it again a moment? I remember from friends in Russia that every couple of years there seems to be these moments of hope that something might change. Is it one of these moments, or do you also feel that something might change at the moment, or something is different with the protests recently, for example, in Russia?
Maybe I start with an answer, but I'm sure Vika has to say something too about this topic. I stopped having hope concerning Russia, actually, because we had this kind of protest, this uprising with hundreds of thousands of people on the street in 2012, and Vika documented this in her reportages, and things only got worse and worse and worse every year. And just recently, when I wrote an article about the foreign agents, a colleague of mine, a Russian historian, said, okay, every time you think it cannot get worse anymore, it gets worse for sure. And it's really, really hard to say, because Thomas Ostermeier just was talking about Serebrennikov, and looking at Serebrennikov and his career is quite, I would say, an eye-opener, because his career started with the support of the Kremlin. His career started when the Kremlin, in the beginning of the, maybe at 2010 probably, started attracting so-called contemporary artists, what we understand as contemporary artists, so critical artists, political artists, artists who attack the state. And he could work quite freely without any pressure for years until the Ukraine crisis started. And when the Ukraine crisis started, the state policy completely changed, and open-minded critical art wasn't needed anymore. And today we have a situation where art and music and theater and all kinds of art play a very important role for national security. They are meant to support national security and to keep language pure, to make people believers, to support the state. And this is what actually has changed. And I don't think this situation won't change after the recent uprisings and the recent protests. Maybe I'm wrong. If, God forbid, in case I will be proven wrong during the next year, I will be more than happy. But during the last 15 years, we are witnessing a constant increasing of every kind of not only censorship, but laws and violence.
Victoria, do you have any hope for the situation? Is something different in the protests right now for you?
Maybe Sandra, translate me this question in Russian, that I understand clear. I'm not sure that I understood detail.
Хорошо. Он спрашивает, есть ли у тебя надежда, что касается политической ситуации в России? Есть ли у тебя надежда?
If to look at facts, political facts, without any hopes. But here, many my friends, many people from from art fields, for example, not only, feel hope. We hope. We feel without any facts that the situation will change. And maybe because Russia is a specific country, there is a very important Soviet traces, Soviet experience. And when I watched the film, I thought about it too. And now our society is split on 50-50. People who had Soviet experience and people who didn't have. And this new generation, they don't want to have anything in common with Soviet reality. So, for 20 years old, for 30 years old, absolutely all what the government says, what Putin says, doesn't work. And maybe these people are a politician without any strong ideas. But they are from another generation. And everybody understands it can be a long time, maybe 1 year, maybe 2 years, but it's impossible that all continue until 2036.
Before we come go a bit away from the current situation in Russia to the film, maybe one based on the question that also came in. Victoria, you mentioned all the people that are not in Russia anymore. There are several others in the film that are not based in Russia anymore, went to exile. You both, all three, said that the spaces for art become more narrow. So is there still a space for, let's say, dissident, radical art? I mean, there's also a big Soviet tradition of art and exchange within apartments, in the non-public space. So the public opinion is raised in more informal context. Does this still exist? So is there still a network of oppositional artists and this happening?
You again return to Soviet experience, but maybe I can think about it. I'm from last Soviet generation, but who younger than me even don't understand about you. Dissident, why? Why they will be dissidents? And now people want to have fun, even in political things. And I really love it. And you know, the most interesting things not in the underground, on private apartments, for example. No, the most interesting things in TikTok and other social networks for teenagers. And they are laughing our power. I think it's the most strongest change.
Thank you. So maybe we could, of course, continue here for long, but maybe we move a bit back to the project of the Moscow trials and the film and the theater project behind it. And
could I comment on what you just said? Maybe just a short little comment. I think what is important, and that was always my experience when I went to Russia and tried to understand what's going on. I think the West is pretty important as having their values, having introduced their values, and the situation in Russia always seemed to me that Russia is mirroring our Western way of life on a bigger scale. So I just came to my mind when I listened to her describing the situation of the younger generation, only wanting to have fun, no tradition with dissidents in a political sense, not remembering Soviet Union. So I think it's also important to understand that it's a turbo-capitalist system where popular culture and all the values of neoliberalism are widespread. And this is the idea of modern Russia as I experienced it. So maybe our view on Russia is something from the old days, you know? And we really have to understand that it's only, this is my point of view, it's only a mirror which makes everything bigger. So the bars are bigger, the money is more, the difference between rich and poor is bigger. And I think because there's so much interdependency, you know, when we look at the political far right in Germany, there are links to Russia, there are links to the idea of a kind of religion and nation coming back. There is a TV channel, Russia Today, influencing politics in Germany. So there are mirroring effects, and as long as we proceed our values in the West, they will go on mirroring this, and we are a bad example, so they will keep in their ideas of nation coming back, family coming back, religion, and so on and so on. We are not a good example of a better way of existence. This is important, I'd say.
That's for sure. We are not a good example. I mean, I think we probably also have to say at this point that we are talking very much, I guess, about the big cities, about the metropolis, about Moscow and St. Petersburg. And Victoria, in your drawings and your work, you have also always focused on the provinces or in the far areas outside of the cities, where, of course, I think there's also a different picture to these things. But maybe if I would, anyway, I know there would be much to say, but I would like to come a bit back to the film now. Say what I found when I first saw the Moscow trials. What probably astonished me most, or was most interesting for me, that I thought it is really an example of an agonistic play. Really, conflicts are acted out, and I'm sitting here between some quotes, under some quotes from Chantal Mouffe. So this concept of agonistic pluralism, which I think is kind of close to this kind of work. So it really brings together different positions that are hard to take often. I mean, watching these films, even without knowing everybody, I mean, I know some of the one side of the people, I don't know the people from the other side, obviously, but even without knowing them, there's a feeling of almost physical feeling that you don't want to be in one space with them, also physical threatening to a degree. But still, it had this tension of this positions in one space. And so I'm kind of like curious, like when you say, yeah, you have people like Vladimir Sergeyev, this is the martial arts orthodox, or Maxim Shevchenko, the TV moderator who was also part of other works of Milo, the General Assembly that took place at Schaubühne, for example. So with the discussions we had, for example, in Germany recently also about all this, do we speak with Nazis, was the kind of slogan. Is it good to speak with Nazis or with fascists, or is it not a good idea? So I guess these questions also come in mind. Do we want to have this? I said it's kind of a utopia that all these people can be in one space still, but do we still want, and it's an imaginary we, but it addresses everybody individually, you know, do we still want to be in this space? How is your feeling? Is it a good idea? Would it be still a good idea to give voice to the people that were so violently acting against freedom of opinion, art, etc.? Should we still endure this? Is it still necessary, or has something changed and actually it's about something else, and rather gathering forces and finding out what other people have in common?
Mm-hmm.
Victoria, you also in your drawings you also bring very different people together. So you also have a very different point of views. But of course they are, let's say, I'm not sure that all of them are as violent as some of the examples we had here. And also, well, they brought on paper together, not necessarily in the same space. So how is your feeling about that?
When Mila invited me, and many people who I know, when Mila invited us, we were discussing with each other that, it's impossible. Maybe we will go, but other people won't go. In reality, absolutely everyone take place. And I think that Mila did it perfect. I really love that he showed social diversity. It's good that he didn't have super tolerant ideas, super tolerant ideas, and politically correct. So it can limits art. It's very bad if such ideas limits art. And I think we were like magnet for each other. So for us, it was interesting to be in one space, really. And it was without any conflicts during these days. And before this event, I decided to check about all these heroes, including Maxim Shevchenko. And the last news about him, he took part in rallies of support Navalny, Alexei Navalny. And he was detained on this rally. And after he criticized that rally are forbidden, and the police made very violent things. So people are changes, and people more interested than their political opinions that they say one time.
What to shift to a more general question, like what would you show in your theater on your stage? Are there limits? Do you think that all these opinions should be expressed, all of them, or would you say no? To a degree, it's also good to say we don't need to give the floor to everybody. We have also an own value system, and that we don't go beyond.
Of course, we have an own value system, and I would always follow the rule: no tolerance with the intolerant. Why would I give a forum to people who don't believe in tolerance, in social tolerance, in the tolerance of different opinions, in the tolerance towards refugees, in the tolerance towards religious minorities, and so on? I think that these voices are anyway too loud in the media, in the newspapers, especially in a shift in the newspapers over the last 10 years, where the news about extreme right have become a kind of a selling point in the media, a selling point for newspapers, a selling point for talk shows in television, and so on and so on. So I proudly defend our space as a space of leftist, liberal thinkers, and I think it's important to defend this space. And I think it's a strategy, it's a tactique to hijack these forums. I know from my own experience that a lot of people from the extreme right in Germany, so-called intellectuals, even as my friend Geoffroy de la Gannerie put it, he doesn't believe that right-wing people can be called intellectuals. But I know that that there are powers dreaming of entering the last forums of leftist liberal thinking, not because they want to discuss with us, but because they want to hijack these podiums to install their narration. It's not about discussing, because a lot of these views they have cannot be discussed. For me, it cannot be discussed, the question of immigration, that we need a new refugee policy. This cannot be discussed, in my point of view. So why would I meet and talk to them?
So in your show, Sergeyev and Shevchenko in the Moscow trials would not have appeared.
No, but Milo is a different kind of theater maker, and I respect what he does. I remember when we did General Assembly in the Schaubühne, there were people, one guy from Turkey, a party member of the Erdogan party, and there were big conflicts going on.
To explain, he denied the genocide on the Armenian people.
Yes, and there was a big power against him from the audience and from participants of the General Assembly. And I thought I wouldn't have done this. But it's Milo's show, so it's okay that he takes this risk. But my personal view is what I said before.
And maybe do you zoom even a bit further out to the question, like, there's of course a tradition of trials and theater. There's also a specific tradition of trials and theater in the Soviet Union of different kinds, like stage trials in the early agitprop tradition, and then, of course, the horrible, infamous stage trials in the Stalin era, etc. Since you worked on this, Sandra, could you maybe talk a bit about the relationship between that you also discovered in your work between theater and trials, and vice versa in a way, theater as a trial and trial as a theater?
I could talk about this for ages. I hope the audience doesn't mind that only my voice can be heard, because I think I can't be seen on screen. I hope that doesn't mind.
I think we see.
What I was always...
We can see you. We can see
wonderful. You. Because I can't see myself, but that's okay. I don't have to see myself. Maybe I will not go too deep into Soviet trial traditions. I think we all more or less know that, especially the Moscow trials, so the real ones from the 30s, to which Milo, with his title, is also referring, were highly theatrically staged and were maybe even more a theater play than a real trial, whatever a real trial may be. Because when we are talking about theater and trial, maybe Milo's Moscow trials were more a real trial than the trials against the organizers of Forbidden Religion and Pussy Riot were, because they were highly staged. The accusation, the people who wrote the complaints were more or less always the same. The witnesses were the same. They had scripted text they were reading on the stand. And this made the real trials a repetitive event. They could be repeated. And this is what is highly interesting for me when it comes to the real trials against artists and curators, that they could be repeated. A real trial is usually a singular event with an unforeseen outcome. But in these cases, the range of staging and the means of theater which were used in courtroom made kind of theater plays out of these trials. And I think Vika can agree with me, because she drew all the witnesses on the corridors when they were rehearsing their text, when they were even going through casting for the court trials. And I think, to go back to your question, this is deeply rooted in Soviet trial tradition, because there were so-called mock trials in the beginning of the Soviet Union. So starting, I don't know, 1918, maybe until the middle of the 20s, when the real show trials started. So they were trials against bacteria, trials against Lenin, trials against God, trials against people who don't behave right. And they were especially made as a theater play, but to confuse people in which space they are sitting, in a theater space or in a trial, to make it more real, to make the experience more real, and to increase the effect the trial had on their behavior. And this is what was happening in the trials against the curators and the artists too. They were meant to have an effect on the behavior and the artistic production, and were meant to increase self-censorship. And this is all very connected. And I think we are witnessing a continuation of these early mock trials and the show trials, because everybody knows how they were functioning. Everybody is used to it, and all Soviet born and raised people are familiar with how these trials were initiated.
What I find interesting
yeah, sorry, no, I think this is why nobody is wondering how this could happen in court in Russia, more or less.
What is interesting that you describe also this genesis in a way. So there were agitprop trials. I think Walter Benjamin famously was one of them and was not sure if it's a real trial or not. And then, of course, the show trials in Stalinism. And I was reminded, because in this afternoon talk, Andres Feil was talking about the trial which he set up in suing the German government for the climate crimes. And there are a lot of examples in theater at the moment where I would say trials are brought in the hope to bring out something good. So the opposite aim. So you described the trials in not the Moscow trials for Milo, but the trials before as trials to enforce self-censorship and to warn people to better take care of what they say and what they do. And then there's the idea of a trial where a higher instance, a higher institution, a higher moral set of rules would actually bring something good. So the German government could be sued for climate crimes, or even in Moscow's Congo Tribunal, that this could bring out a solution for these crimes. So there are very, very different aspects connected to crimes. And I would say in theater, a lot of the trials, of course, have a different view at the moment. They want to get a good result. And of course, the question was always in the air: what would have been if in the documentation, the Moscow trials, it was a close vote, as we saw. What would have been if art would have been declared guilty? Would have changed that something? So I think that's quite interesting. Do you believe? I mean, since there were also in your house happening projects dealing with trials, what do you think of this format as a theatrical format?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to comment, because now, as I've listened to the history of mock trials and show trials, I completely understand what happened to Kirill last summer. So it is a clear sign to other artists: behave and introduce self-censorship in your work, so that you will not end up in front of a judge and be sentenced. So this is, for me, like really a moment of learning. And as we are in school here, I learned my lesson. Thank you very much. There was an interesting comment from one of the people sending messages and questions here, talking in the context of what we just saw, the Moscow trial, he was talking of Lehrstück. So as if Milo's trials or the General Assembly do have a tradition of Lehrstück, like the Lehrstücke from Bertolt Brecht. So I think it is in this tradition of going under a process and making experiences where people in the experience of a fictional but also realistic situation do understand more. In the case of the Brecht Lehrstücke, it was meant, these Lehrstücke were meant to be performed by workers in order to learn for the fight for communism. So I don't think that this is the case now. I mean, with these examples we're discussing here, it still remains in the intellectual art bubble. I mean, we are learning something, possibly. We are putting into a scenic context different opinions, like you were mentioning, but it's not a group of people making experiences who really suffer under the conditions of the reality. I mean, and so there's a link, and at the same time there's no link, I would say. But I, as a director, I look at these examples of staged trials very fascinated. I mean, because I'm much more working in a different style, so I'm admiring this risk Milo takes, because he does not know what will happen. It's live, and the participants in the General Assembly, for example, they didn't have a scripted text. They knew what they want to defend as an opinion, but there was no scripted scenario. So I admire a lot this risk and the freedom he gives to the performance, which is on an artistic level something which I find very fascinating.
I mean, one question that could this leads to, in a way, something that also was discussed here before, a bit like, of course, what is then the role of the director? And in this afternoon there was a lot of talk about transparency, like to show how it's made. The film does do that, so it shows how the film is produced. The question could be like, how much is it in the trial that is still set up by an artist who enabled it, but also is an outside person? So I think that's generally an interesting question for the meeting of political projects and how they are made politically and not only have political topics. But maybe for now, because we slowly also have to come to an end, and I think one of the overarching questions in the School of Resistance is, of course, like, when we talk about resistance, what role does what role art plays in this at all? And is it more in the aesthetic, or is it how directly can it be, and so on? This was already discussed in the last days. But so maybe to come slowly to an end with a, let's say, impossibly big question, but anyway, asking that. So what is the role of art, specifically maybe in Russia now, Victoria, but also in general? Is art, how much can art be part of this resistance? Is it more like actually we should leave art and join other movements? What is the relationship, which is discussed a lot over the last 10, 15 years with all these movements and interactions with artistic scenes also, but I guess is answered always differently also in every context and in every time. So Victoria, do you believe that art, I mean, since you're an artist and you're working on it, I guess you believe it must help something. How much do you feel is art in the moment, for example, in Russia, really plays a role or could play a role in a possible change of society?
I did a lot of art on political and social topics during 10 years. I think it gave me rights to say this moment. The main goal for art, in my opinion, to do people happier, to give more joy, more fun. And when we think about resistance, about how art must struggle with political regime, it's again nothing about personal freedom. And in my country, in Russia, it's problem. We were born without personal freedom. And for example, my Soviet childhood was absolutely joyless. And my friend had the same. So I hope that my art to talk with personal people and to help them to be happy and to be funny. I absolutely believe that for Russian culture we need more fun.
It wouldn't have been my first idea, looking at your drawings, that they're about fun primarily. But yeah, Sandra, you want to add to this?
Well, I don't know if I'm the one to say what art should do or how art can resist, but sometimes I think the best, or one of the best ways for art to resist is just to exist, not to cease to exist, not to hide itself, not to disappear because of the pressure, but to exist.
To also pass on this question to you, I guess with the work which often is very explicitly political, your work also, do you have a higher aim than it was formulated like this for what art can change in this?
I think looking at the history of art and engaged art, and then situation in Germany, I'm very much not resignated, but maybe a little bit frustrated, because there were times in the 20th century where avant-garde art and talking to the people was linked. For example, if you look at Luigi Nono, he had this dream. So there was a time where incredible advanced avant-garde art had a connection to the popular scene. This today is completely gone. I mean, we either discuss avant-garde aesthetics, or we discuss Volkstheater as a tool. It's still very much existing in France, for example, Théâtre Populaire. So I think what our mission should be as artists is to bring these two together again. So I don't see a way of doing banal art in order to talk to the people. I don't think this is the right way. But we need to find a way to get out of our bubble. That's for sure. And that's very, very important to get out of this bubble, because otherwise we don't have any effect. So, and talking about the effect, I'm always answering to this question. I think as an engaged artist, it's so important to be both, to be in the street and in the rehearsal room. I think now we reached a point everywhere in the world where we need to be in the street. We cannot only be in the rehearsal room. And so this is what I'm trying to do, to be in the street, but at the same time try to advance the aesthetics of my work. And I'm coming back to Brecht again. I don't know why, but yeah, it's pretty obvious being in Berlin and talking about art as a tool of political change or political resistance. Maybe it's obvious to come back to Brecht, but we know that on the 17th of June, Brecht refused to be in the street. The people were coming into the rehearsal room and said there's an upheaval going on outside. And Brecht replied, for me it's better, I'm doing more for the mission if I stay in the rehearsal room. I think that was a wrong decision. And this is a crucial point in a lot of lives of artists, I'd say, where they need to decide at a certain point to be in the street, and not only in the rehearsal room or in the editing room if you're a filmmaker or a composer in front of your compositions. And one last thing, adding to my point on Brecht, he probably was very engaged and in his time avant-garde thinker of different forms of theater, and probably also inventing new forms of theater. But he could not avoid fascism in Germany. So this is an important point. I think when the going gets tough, so when we are really under threat, like we are in the world, everywhere, in Russia, but not only, also in the European Union, there are so many examples. When the going gets tough, you need to be in the street. So this would be my answer to your question.
There's also a tradition of going out from the theater into the street, or going back, taking over the theater from the side of the street. Well, this is obviously a lot we could continue talking about, and it was also already 3 very good final words. And I would do a bit undramaturgically, because there was one question coming up from the audience, and I would like to maybe give you the last word, Victoria, in this, with a rather pragmatic question, I guess. This question was like, is there anything that you would expect us, and I guess us in this case means a German audience or German artist scene, I don't know if the question came there, to do at the moment? Like what is there, what would be a support for the situation? Or we talked before, like you said, like you're not going to Russia anymore, for good reasons. For example, should there be a boycott, should the opposite be actually everybody coming? Are there other things, or is it something anyway from the outside not much can be done about? So would you have an expectation or a demand to narrow it down from us?
Political help from Germany. Yes. The question is about, are we waiting for support from Germany in our political situation?
Yeah, maybe less from the state than from people that are watching this, or from artists, from yeah.
I don't know. I can only say from me, I'm not waiting for this help. Maybe young people waiting for, maybe. I think we are waiting for only one thing. Of course, this moment Russia is a terrible situation with bad condition, but we feel ourselves like European people with the same culture. We don't want to be like from the second world, and someone from abroad will research us, and someone said, all Russian people support Putin, love Putin, and other people say they must struggle for their rights. I think it's right, don't wait for any help, but please don't criticize us too.
Good. I think that's a very good final word for the conversation tonight. So I thank you all three a lot for being here live and online. Thanks for everybody for watching. And the School of Resistance continues tomorrow. Please check out the program. And thank you very much and good night.
Good night.
Good night.